You're listening to Inside CDDFT, the podcast for the County Durham and Darlington NHS Foundation Trust.
Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Inside CDDFT, our podcast for colleagues across County Durham and Darlington NHS Foundation Trust. So a slightly different topic for us today. I'm joined by two colleagues from our IT team. I'm going to get them to introduce themselves in a moment, and we're going to have a chat about cyber fraud, something which is obviously incredibly important to us at work, but also in our personal home lives, and we're going to get into some good tips for keeping us safe at work and at home. So, welcome colleagues. Would you like to introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about your role at the Trust?
Thank you, Gillian. I'm Craig Robinson. I'm the head of ICT.
Thank you, Craig. I'm Peter Maguire. I'm the ICT Operations and Service Manager, so I look after all the service desk and the desk side support team. Cybersecurity is under my remit and some project activity as well.
Brilliant. Thank you both for joining me today. And Craig, you're missing out a bit of the role that you do as well, because...
Well, head of IT is a kind of overarching role, really. So it covers everything from front of house, looking after the areas that Peter looks after, but also the infrastructure, the servers, the network, and the cybersecurity as well comes under that role. So pretty much a bit of everything, really.
Yeah, quite a big role that you were just covering there in a short way. But brilliant. So who would like to start us off and just tell us what is cyber fraud?
Well, cyber fraud can come in various forms. It can be phishing, and these are terms that you might have heard before: phishing, social engineering, ransomware, credential theft, and I suppose in the NHS, phishing is particularly prevalent, where attackers will contact you, whether it be via email or whatever, and they'll try to get you or to trick you into sharing some sensitive information, usually login information or information about yourselves.
So most of the systems that we deliver are secured by design. So all of the equipment is security connected and security protected. But a lot of the things that we find that we're interacting with create loopholes in that security. And particularly if people get emails from outside the NHS or even other NHS contacts that don't look genuine, they're often asking for credentials that don't give access to the right things.
Why would someone want to target the NHS?
Well, they're not necessarily targeting the NHS every time. Some of them are kind of general attacks, but a health record or a health data has got a huge value. I don't know what it is, Peter, financially, but I think it's worth more than a credit card information, for example. So health data in the underworld, so to speak, is actually worth quite a bit of money.
Yeah, I think so. Generally, phishing emails and the attacks that we see on a user level are a gateway into other activity within the trust. So recent attacks on other NHS organisations have seen data being encrypted by malicious people and then held to ransom. So they're extorting money from the NHS in return for the data being released.
Wow, it can be pretty frightening actually, can't it? And they get more and more sophisticated, don't they? And I know you mentioned there, Peter, other trusts, because we've had attempts at CDDFT, haven't we? But
yes.
We're pretty good, thanks to you guys and the teams. We're quite good at spotting these things or having systems in place to prevent this happening, aren't we?
Yeah, very much so. We've got things like firewalls, and we've got their laptops are all tested against cyber hardening and things like that. So we certainly do our best in terms of cyber security. There is a reliance on every user in the trust doing their bit as well. So one of the things that we need people to be is much more is very vigilant about the things that they're interacting with. So sometimes you might find a website that has that's been compromised by bad actors, and that isn't doing what the website should be doing. It's asking you for usernames and passwords and so on that you're not expecting. And likewise, emails that you might get that ask you to click on a link or urgently reply and send some personal information that they can then use to get into your account.
Yeah.
And once they've gained a foothold, it's very easy for them to then start to manipulate other people by pretending to be somebody genuine.
Yeah, you've mentioned phishing emails a couple of times there, and so if I'm at my laptop working away and I get an email that I'm not quite sure about or something doesn't seem quite right about it, what should I do?
There's a number of things you can do to try and help avoid the attacks. So look out for unexpected emails. Is it someone you're expecting? Now, that's not necessarily a green flag either. It could be someone that you know you're expecting an email from. But if they start asking for financial information or asking you to log into a website or do something, particularly if they add a sense of urgency. If you must do it today, or it's really urgent that you get in touch with me, and the link that might be included in there, if you hover over that link, it might be for a website that you may well know, but it might be with slightly different character in that. So instead of an O, it might be a 0, or it might be even some of these attacks are so sophisticated they can even use foreign alphabets to make it look like a letter E, but it's not a letter E, it's a foreign letter E, that kind of thing. But really be careful with links in particular, and attachments, anything that involves you installing some software to be able to do something. And really importantly for members of the trust who are listening, don't ever try to install anything on the laptops. We have got a good suite, as Peter said, of tools that will stop that kind of thing happening, but don't even try to do that, because that is it could be a way into the organisation that we've not stopped.
I think historically we've seen these phishing emails have got quite poor grammar and spelling. Mm-hmm. They don't sound particularly natural. More recently, that's improved from their perspective, so they're much easier to fall foul of. And I think if you do find yourself having clicked on something, then please let us know within the IT department as soon as possible, because we can take steps to remediate against that.
Yeah, there's no embarrassment. If you do,
No.
Don't feel, think, oh no, I've done something like that. If you have clicked something, you followed the link, don't be embarrassed and just delete it and hide it. Ring IT, contact someone from the trust, because we can help you with that one. So there's no embarrassment, honestly.
No, I think that's a really good point, Craig, because it's better to be safe than sorry, isn't it? And just like you say, a good reassuring message for colleagues not to be afraid to do that or feel embarrassed to do that. You can do it on the IT portal as well, I think. Can you say that you've had a suspicious email?
You can log it through the IT service desk on the website, or you can call up on 32777 if you're inside the hospital as well. So, but please contact IT if you have any suspicions.
I've noticed that as well, Peter, because like you say, it used to be that they had really poor grammar or spellings, but now, thinking more in my home life, you get some from places that look like they've come from Royal Mail, or different things that look so real almost. It's easy to be caught out by it, but you just really got to think about, were you expecting something? You mentioned, weren't you?
I think there's a comedy value to some of the Nigerian prince trying to get you to subscribe to his $1 million inheritance and things like that. But actually, very often you'll find that it's from a bank or from your internet provider or your mobile phone provider that's saying, click here to see your latest bill, or even things like, it looks like your latest bill is slightly more than normal. Click here to make sure it's right. And they are very tempting to fall into the trap of thinking, I am a customer of that supplier, so I'll click on it and find out what they're saying.
A lot of them are time specific as well, so you'll find around Christmas time, as you mentioned there, Gillian, Royal Mail, Amazon parcels, etc., Christmas time, but also other time specific things, so tax returns, end of the financial year, even if they target an organisation around payday. You might find something that would pop in that wouldn't seem out of the ordinary for the time of year or for when it arrives. We had one recently. We do a staff survey, for example, and if anybody was targeting our organisation, they could find out that we were doing the staff survey and use that as a vehicle to send a phishing attack.
Yeah, no, I noticed that one actually. And sometimes I think it comes down to time, doesn't it? Because when we're all so busy and we get so many emails, particularly in the NHS, it's easy to just click on something or think, oh yeah, that looks okay. But it's just taking that extra minute, isn't it, just to be sure about things. And again, either contacting IT, or if it is something like the staff survey or a campaign, thinking what they've seen through the trust communications that they know is kind of legit and does make sense from that perspective. And so most of us, when we're using our laptops or different devices, we're using passwords. Any good advice and tips on how to set a strong password?
Passwords is an interesting one, because historically there was always a view that you would use a really complex password, with numbers and letters, and you change the E's for threes and things like that. But really, there's been some research on this, hasn't there, Peter? That a long password with a less changing it less often is more suitable. So one of the things we recommend is choosing 3 unconnected words and making a long password up to 14 characters. So you think, 14 characters, that's long. But if you pick 3 words that are familiar to you or unconnected, you could actually make a reasonably good password. You can still add uppercase, lowercase to further strengthen it, but I suppose the thing is really avoid repetition as well.
Yes, it's really important to not use the same password on multiple accounts.
Guilty.
So if you can imagine a scenario where your Spotify or your Netflix password was the same as your a banking password, then you might find that a compromise to one of those organisations would then lead you to be vulnerable in all of the different places where you use that username and password.
Yeah.
One of the tips that I practice myself is to put a particular thing in front of my three words that relate to the system or the service that I'm logging into. So, the word bank followed by your 3-word password makes that password unique to that particular application.
Well, that's quite a good tip, actually, Peter. As someone of a certain age who suffers with memory problems, I am guilty in the past of using the same password for many different things.
Yeah.
So it's good just to think how we could perhaps change that up a little bit, but still remember them in an easy way.
Yeah. And the technology is helping as well. So, for example, if you have used a password and you're using, for example, an iPhone, and I think Android do it as well, if your password has been compromised or it has been leaked, you will get a message say this password has been seen elsewhere. It looks like this account might have been compromised. That's a cue to change that password. And do change passwords frequently as well. Don't feel that, we've all done it, haven't we? You've got that many accounts for everything in day-to-day life. It is easy. But as Peter said, a rotating password where you put a common factor at the beginning can make the password familiar but actually unique to that website.
Yeah, no, really good point. Okay, so what about multi-factor authentication, which is
Sure.
driving some people potty, but obviously has a very strong purpose. And as someone who's introduced new systems this year with the Trust website, it's something that we've been through and are using, but it can be a bit tricky. Tell us a bit about that.
So multi-factor authentication is an extra layer of security on top of your username and your password. So that most of these websites, and people who will be familiar with them in their own personal lives, send you a code to your mobile phone or ask you to do something that only you can do. So if somebody's found your username and your password somehow, they still can't use it without it triggering that extra multi-factor identification to yourself. In the Trust, the NHS mail system introduced this, and we worked really hard at trying to reduce the number of times that people are prompted for their second factor of authentication, because we are really aware that it's quite intrusive and can be disruptive, especially for clinical colleagues where they haven't got access to their mobile phone all day. So it is a balancing act between having that assurance that you are definitely you, and being able to get on and do the work that you need to do.
There's a really important thing to remember with multi-factor authentication, and just because you've got multi-factor authentication doesn't mean that you're completely shielded. And by that, what I mean is that multi-factor authentication can still be attacked by somebody who, like a bad actor, who might try to extract that from you. So, for example, someone could have you on the phone, claim it to be from your bank, and they would trigger the MFA, the multi-factor authentication code, to be sent to your phone, and they would ask you, "Oh, we've just sent you a code. Can you recite the code?" You could give that code, and you've actually just given the attacker your second factor. So it's really important you never give that code to anybody, including IT, including the bank or organisation. That is for single use. You use that yourself, and you input that into the website, and even then make sure that it is still a legitimate website, because multi-factor authentication is a great extra level of protection, but it is not flawless. And we need people to be careful, be very, very careful. And we have seen examples, and I won't mention any names, of a member of staff who had that happen with them on WhatsApp, and someone had said, "I'm going to send you a code, can you let me have it to help me unlock my account?" They sent him the code, he recited the code back to them and lost access to his WhatsApp account as a result of that MFA leak. So that was on a personal level, that wasn't a trust issue, but it did happen to someone in the trust, and unfortunately he lost the control of that WhatsApp account as a result of that.
Oh gosh, I think it's good to share some of those examples, isn't it? Because you realise, bringing it to life, how easily it can be done and the impact of it. I know just recently I'm doing some work with Sunderland University, and I couldn't get onto one of their systems, so I had to phone their IT team, and the code came through to my NHS email account. Obviously didn't give him the code, had to put that in, but he was helping with my password, but I had the code, so there was still that kind of level of protection between the two. So that's really helpful to understand.
I think it's a really interesting point that actually all of this that we've talked about is relevant in your work life, but it's also really relevant in your personal life, because everything we do is either app based or website based, or and it's all protected. The only protection we've got about being compromised is a username and a password, and very often.
Yeah, and that information could be highly personal. It could be pictures, it could be documents, banking information, financials, and it's bad if you have an issue at work, but if you losing private photographs, they could be deleted or lost forever. Family memories that you can't get back, and also financially as well. The people who've lost access to their bank accounts and can't pay their bills as a result of that, and it can take. Sometimes you don't even banks can protect you in some ways, and if you haven't been negligent, you can get that money back, but it can still take a long time, and you can be very, very inconvenienced in between.
No, I think that's right. And just a couple of things that spring to mind, I guess, Craig, it goes back to that point around not being embarrassed, because I think, thinking about some of my older relatives who have fallen victim to some of this, sometimes they're very ashamed that they've been caught out by it, but really they shouldn't be, because it's so sophisticated, and they particularly target different demographics with some of these things. So really we should have these, like we're having today, these open conversations just to highlight how important it is and what to look out for.
Yeah, I mean, I from a personal experience, my grandmother had a landline in the house, and the only people would ring would be us. And it got to the point where the phone was ringing constantly with people trying to scam her. And in the end, we bought this little box that actually filtered the phone calls at the point of coming in. And I think elderly people in general are targeted more, because I think generationally they're probably more trusting. They're not cynical. They're not, they will talk to people. They will pick up the landline. A lot of people these days don't even have a landline, but elderly people are more likely to have one in the house. And if it rings, they'll pick it up, and invariably it's the other person on the other end could well be trying to extract their hard-earned cash.
Yeah, no, that's great. Is there anything else that either of you would like to cover off today?
I think I would mention very briefly, I think, the impact on the NHS of cyber fraud, because I think, the impact of this is as a patient at the other end of this, and whilst the attack may not be targeted directly at our trust or the NHS, you've got the knock-on effect of these, and the cases that we've seen in the NHS are patient data breaches, confidential sensitive information, disruption of services, so people's appointments being cancelled, data being lost, and the financial loss as well. Every time an NHS trust has a cyber incident, there's a cost associated with restoration of that and the loss of that clinical time as well. So you can't underestimate the impact on the NHS. And we've seen some big cases nationally, haven't we, Peter?
Recently,
where the one in London particularly, where their pathology services was out of action for months.
Yeah, I think we've had some quite local. I think Liverpool had some
Over
attacks,
here,
and then
yeah.
there was an attack in Scotland recently as well. So it's a constant source of threat.
No,
Be extra vigilant, everyone. That's the message of the day.
That's the key message, isn't it? And not just at work, at home. I think one of the things that we as an organisation are always striving to do is that kind of supporting people as people, so not just as an employee of the trust, but as a person. So a lot of the content that we're trying to share through this medium or other comms that we do is around you as a person. So how can we help you at home as well as at work? And this topic certainly lends itself to that. So I appreciate your time and thank you for sharing that information with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is Inside CDDFT, the podcast for the County Durham and Darlington NHS Foundation Trust.